This is the World Organic News for the week ending 29 April 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. I'm back to the usual format this week. I'm glad so many people enjoyed last week's diversion, with myself being interviewed for the Permaculture Plus podcast about what I'm doing here in Highclere as we run a regenerative experiment on small plots. So back to the normal format. This week's first post is from the Applied Ecologist blog entitled How to Keep the Mycorrhizae. The more hosts you leave, the more symbionts you get. We haven't looked at this area for some time, so let's dive in. Quote, one of the most important above-below-ground interactions is that between plants and mycorrhizal fungi. Acting as symbionts, mycorrhizal fungi are involved in plants' nutrient uptake and water acquisition, as well as protection against pathogens. They also take part in processes at a broader ecological scale. They contribute to plant diversity and community assembly, affect nutrient cycling, and are fundamental to ecosystem functioning. Due to their key position at the soil-plant interface, mycorrhizae can be highly affected both positively and negatively by human-introduced changes in environments. End quote. The depths and extent of the mycorrhizal communities is beyond comprehension some days. That we have managed to still produce food whilst ripping apart these is quite amazing. The biodiversity effects and community assembly do need a little thought. If we destroy the mycorrhizal communities through, say, clear felling, what pioneer species do we encourage? Are they more likely to be fire tolerant or less? Are they the species that thrive in fire-affected niches and are therefore happy to burn as part of their propagation strategy? We know so little of these things. If the precautionary principle is applied, I think we would see some long-term value. Of course, a cubic metre of wood chips has a value immediately. So too do the mycorrhizal communities. The wood chips value, though, can be expressed in dollar terms. The mycorrhizal communities not yet. It would appear that despite the greenwash of the triple bottom line, it is only ever the dollar value that will be accounted for. After all, you can't tax, so far as I'm aware, implied improvement in biodiversity by not clear felling a forest, but give them time. But there are opportunities. The post goes on to talk about retention forestry. Quote, retention forestry, a practice that has been implemented in forest management since just a few decades ago, is an alternative to clear cutting, by which a portion of the original stand is left unlogged to maintain the continuity of structural and compositional diversity. Human-induced disturbance provoked by forestry can greatly differ from natural disturbance in terms of effects on the ecosystem. Retention forestry has emerged as a response to the rapid ongoing modification and simplification of forest ecosystems. It is therefore recognised not only as a way to conserve the structural, functional and compositional diversity of forest ecosystems, but also as a useful tool for the restoration of impoverished or degraded forests. Mycorrhizal fungi are within the organisms that benefit from tree retention. And there's a quote there for you to see in from a different reference, end quote. That will be in the show notes. In much the same way as no fishing zones allow for the rejuvenation of fish numbers, so too retention forestry maintains an oasis of underground life intact. It is easier for these underground resources to strike out to repair when they are supported by a strong above-ground community, and vice versa for that matter. We separate the above and the below ground, but remember they are just one ecosystem. It is for our convenience that we who live above the soil surface and are not plant-based make this distinction. Now, I heard an analogy the other day that seems appropriate at this point. If we accept that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, give or take, and we convert that into 46 hours, because we can understand hours more easily, then in the last 30 seconds of that 46-hour period, we humans have removed 50% of the world's forest cover. Now, this is bad enough, but with our growing understanding of the mycorrhizal communities, we have also wiped out 50% of this balancing structure within the soils. On the most used soils we see, say, North Africa, once the breadbasket of the Romans, both Republic and Empire, is now a desert for all intents and purposes. The Fertile Crescent and the desert lands of Iran and Iraq were once grain-producing behemoths and are now desert. Could it be that the tree cover removal is not the cause of the desertification, but that the tree cover removal is the cause of the mycorrhizal death, and it is this death which leads to desertification? Of course, both explanations require the removal of tree cover. The point I'm attempting to make is that we may have a little more time up our sleeves if we can re-establish the tree cover quickly. The mycorrhizal communities, especially if there has been some retention forestry going on, those underground powerhouses of plant production may be restored and extended into desert areas over time. Perhaps we need to draw a line. The Chinese have been attempting to stop the expansion of the Gobi, and the Great Wall of Africa is a similar attempt to stop the southern expansion of the Sahara. The Great Green Wall, of course, is a 15-mile deep green belt planted across the continent from east to west or west to east along that line through about 20 different countries, I believe. And it seems to be working. So once stabilised, I'm certain we can then focus not so much on the tree cover, which has been the focus since last century, but focus on the underground resources. For it is here, I think, that we can effect permanent change. Now, while the forest is not a static thing, individual trees come and go. The makeup changes as fire events and rainfall variations occur through time, but the forest itself remains. That 50% loss of tree cover mentioned above has been playing on my mind ever since I read it. It is both quite depressing and equally hopeful. There are any number of ways to produce food from trees. I discussed the 1 million hazelnut project in the USA a few episodes back. Just about any oil would be better than the palm oil, with its tendency to cut down rainforest to grow a monocrop. But it is in the temperate regions that most afforestation has occurred, and it is in these areas where tree planting will have massive impacts. Not every tree will need to produce human food, but I think a permaculture approach where each tree provides at least 3 benefits would be a good place to start. So an oak tree would provide shade, mulch, acorns for pig feed, and eventually timber. We can extend this out into other areas, but the principle is straightforward enough. Replacing as much of the 50% we have removed of tree cover and converting the remaining agricultural land to regenerative models will have us well on the way to reversing the build-up in the atmosphere of too much CO2 too quickly. Toss in the continuing falling prices of solar PV and wind generation, and we are heading towards a situation where we will be decarbonising the air and recarbonising the soil. On that rather happy note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. If you're still interested in starting your podcast journey, there's a checklist over at John Moore Podcasting Services you can sign up for. A link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.